The 2025 TCL QM7K is an enormous improvement over the 2024 QM7 in so many ways. I mean, you get better contrast, better viewing angles, and a much clearer picture, but is it worth saving those pennies to pick up a mini LED versus an OLED in 2025? And if so, at what price should you consider it? Well, let's go ahead and take a look today at the 65-inch variant, which was lent to me by TCL to figure out just that. Now, real quick, in terms of the specs, this is still a 4K 144 Hertz / 1080p 288 Hertz plus VRRQD mini LED, this time crisp Glow HVA panel with the TCL AIPQ Pro processor. It supports WVision IQ, HDR10 plus, HDR10 and HLG, so you should be able to throw any HDR content on this thing. And in terms of the price, well, the 65-inch variant I'm going to be reviewing today at the time of review is $1199.99, and with a 1-year parts and labor warranty, well, overall, that's a pretty aggressive price point, although I do suspect it'll see massive price drops pretty quickly as well. And in terms of the ports, pause if you need to, but most importantly, it has two HDMI 2.1 ports, one of which is capable of 4K 144 Hertz, and two that support 4K 60 Hertz, and one of which is EARC. And now I want to talk about my experience with the TV from the setup to viewing it, just so you can get an idea of what to expect. Now, in terms of the setup, thankfully, it is very, very easy. I mean, not only is the Google OS that's on this thing great and an absolute snap to get going, but the unboxing experience itself is also very easy. You can take it out with two people very simply, as the weight is quite low, and the assembly itself is also very straightforward, which is great. But the actual experience after you set it up, well, that's probably what you're most interested in. And I gotta tell you, it's pretty great. I mean, when I compare it just from memory to the QM7, it's a pretty massive improvement. The QM7K, in my opinion, upon first viewing in terms of contrast, color, clarity, everything, really reminded me of last year's QM8, and that's definitely a good thing because the QM8 was a far more expensive TV. This thing is looking like it could be another great value option in 2025 if it also gets the accuracy right. And that's why we got to talk about the color. Now, the color itself upon viewing is definitely very good. I mean, trust me, you're gonna get great HDR brightness out of this thing, not only in terms of, well, the actual brightness it can put out, but also the brightness of colors as well, which is very important for HDR content. And thanks to the increased clarity, it also jumps off the screen in a way that the QM7 last year simply couldn't do. But what about the actual accuracy itself? And for those home theater enthusiasts out there, I'm going to go over the CalMan results, and for everybody else, feel free to skip ahead. And let's start off with the SDR performance out of the box. And in Rec 709, well, the TCL QM7K follows the EOTF curve well, but it does have some issues with white balance on my model. Now, I thankfully was able to resolve those, and I'll have the best settings linked in my Patreon in the description below, which also gets you access to the Discord where you can ask me questions and is the best way to support this channel. But now let's talk about the PC gaming mode. It did actually do better than I expected and was pretty accurate out of the box for SDR. Likewise with the color accuracy test in SDR, overall, it did a pretty dang good job. I mean, an average delta E of 1.6 is very good for this TV, and I'm honestly shocked considering the price point as well as with the mini LED technology that they were able to get this done. But now let's talk about the HDR, because this can definitely be hit or miss with a lot of TVs out there. And here we can see that, well, in filmmaker mode, out of the box, it does have some significant issues with under tracking, which means it's just not going to be as bright as it should. Now, thankfully, this does seem to be mostly due to energy saving issues. And when you disable all that stuff, well, you do actually get a pretty accurate result. And in terms of the color gamut, well, it did actually get a pretty solid 78% in terms of UV for BT 2020 coverage, which is actually better than something like a WOLED display from even pretty recent models. And speaking of color performance, how does it do in terms of accuracy and a color match HDR result? It has some visible inaccuracies, but overall, actually, it's pretty good for a display of this type. So the short version, the TCL QM7K looks great, delivers deep saturated HDR imagery, and has good SDR gamma tracking in filmmaker mode. However, some changes are necessary to get accurate HDR playback in filmmaker mode, which is a bit odd. Thankfully, this is easy to fix, and the QM7K after the fixes actually has some of the best HDR color accuracy I've seen at or even above this price range. Very impressive stuff. But now let's talk about HDR in a way that you're probably really looking forward to, and that's the brightness, as this is a huge deal if you're looking for a display in a bright room. Can this get the job done? And I would say it kind of depends. It's certainly going to be brighter full screen than OLED displays, but in actual HDR content, it can vary pretty widely. Take a look here at the peak window brightness that I measured here. You can see that, well, it is a slight improvement over the 2024 QM7, but it's not necessarily blowing my socks off. I mean, you're getting nearly 2000 nits in a 10% window and nearly 600 in a 100% window, whereas some of the more expensive and larger mini LEDs are definitely dwarfing that in terms of their window brightness. But in a real HDR scene, this is where it kind of underperformed versus what I was expecting. I mean, take a look here. The QM7K is unfortunately near the bottom of the pack, just outperforming the LG C4 OLED. Now, this is a very challenging scene for mini LED in a lot of ways, so I can definitely give it some slack. In some other content, it does way better. However, in my opinion, this kind of looks almost like a bug, and I think TCL should adjust the way it handles brightness to be more consistent from scene to scene, in my opinion. So if you're expecting a massive improvement over the QM7 in terms of brightness, well, you're really not going to get that here. What you should expect to see is higher clarity, better viewing angles, and contrast. So let's move on to those. And honestly, I think those are far more important for mini LED in 2025. So talking about the contrast, well, last year the QM7, like all mini LEDs, struggled with contrast. It was especially apparent in low light scenes, and while the QM7K does bring significant enhancements in this area, it's still a challenge. Now, take a look here. You can see that on the chart, it does definitely dwarf the results of the QM7 from last year, and it looks really good. But if you take a look here at some images that I have of it trying to show micro contrast, well, it certainly has some problems. The most apparent issue on the QM7K is the massive blooming that can occur with a black background. When counting local dimming zones, I noticed nearly the whole backlight firing up every time a new zone was engaged, and honestly, this could lead to some issues. For example, where if you have text against a dark scene, you could see some significant blooming depending on the content. And that's just something you're gonna have to deal with more budget mini LED displays. But now let's talk about the clarity, finish, and ambient light handling, because one thing TCL absolutely nailed this year was the finish. Thankfully, TCL chose to upgrade the coating this year from the semi-gloss that they used on the QM7 to a full glossy coating, and this has definitely improved the clarity and vibrancy in a significant way. This was an excellent choice and has led to the QM7K looking like a far more premium TV. Now, to be fair, like all glossy coatings, you will see some direct reflections on this display, and thanks in part to the anti-reflective treatment, you may even get some rainbow-like streaks across the screen. However, it does hold on to the contrast and the clarity and the vibrancy far better than a matte coating would. And for that reason, I feel like this was definitely the right choice for the QM7K. Now, you can also see, based on the BGR subpixel layout of this display, that there may be some slight reduction in clarity on text and things like that if you're up close, but overall, it's still going to be a lot better than OLED, and I think is certainly acceptable for a display of this type. Now let's talk about the motion performance. Some people love motion interpolation, some people hate it. I'm in the camp of I love it when it's done right. On my unit, the QM7K did a nice job of cleaning up 24p judder and test, massively smoothing out the image in motion, but in real content, it did have some issues, as you might expect. When you turn up the motion interpolation to very high levels, especially if there's a lot of detail in the scene and it's moving very quickly, you can definitely get some artifacting, and that's something you have to keep in mind when you're using this setting, if you want to use it or not. So it's certainly not the best motion interpolation I've seen, but it is better than some more expensive displays I've tested, so not too bad. Now let's talk about the gaming performance. I mean, should you use a QM7K for gaming? And I'd say it kind of depends. I mean, for console gaming, certainly this could be a good option, and with 144 Hertz, it could make for a good gaming monitor depending on the motion performance and the latency. And let's go ahead and take a look at that. So in terms of the motion performance, you can see here that at 144 Hertz, it actually does way better than I was expecting. I mean, mini LEDs often have a ton of trailing behind it, and that's not too much the case for this display. It's certainly worse than OLED, don't get me wrong, the G4 is kind of mogging it here, but it's actually a lot better than some other displays like the U8N that you can see way over to the right. So a bit better than I was expecting, and in terms of the latency, it does a pretty decent job overall, but unfortunately it is behind a lot of other displays. It's certainly capable of doing gaming on especially consoles, but also PC. However, would I use it for PC gaming? Probably not. I think you'd be better off with an OLED, and even for console gaming, if gaming is going to be your main focus, I would certainly point you towards OLEDs, and I'd probably take a look at the S90F this year. That's going to be one of my top recommendations, and this, while it's pretty decent, just won't hold a candle to the near instantaneous response times, as well as, of course, better contrast and lower latency that something like an S90F can give you when it comes to gaming. But now let's talk about the viewing angles and uniformity. Look, the QM7 last year had massive issues with viewing angles. It was a huge problem, and thankfully the QM7K this year has definitely improved upon it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still going to be an issue. You do lose some contrast as well as color and brightness when you view the image off angle, but it didn't seem to be, at least in my opinion, nearly as bad as last year's model. Now, is it as good as things like the 98UX or the Bravia 9? Certainly not. Those TVs and definitely OLEDs are way better when it comes to viewing angles than this one, but I think they've finally reached a level where it's acceptable for the majority of living rooms where you might be viewing this. Now, if you have chairs that are way off to the side, yeah, don't buy this TV. You're gonna lose a ton of image quality. However, if you're within reasonable viewing angles of the TV, you're unlikely to notice any reduction in the quality of the image for the majority of buyers. And now let's talk about the sound. The QM7K, look, it's a bit of a letdown when it comes to the sound quality. The timbre is just a bit off, and it seems very thin. It lacks bass and body, and ultimately, it's unconvincing. And for that reason, I would really recommend at least picking up some sort of sound bar for this TV or dedicated audio setup if you want to get the most out of your experience. Hopefully, this is something that can be improved with future versions. And now let's talk about the firmware and the menu. So one thing TCL has been nailing each year is the OS. Personally, I'm a big fan of Google OS when it's done right, and they've definitely done that here. Once again, it works flawlessly. Every TCL TV I have used, as far as I can recall, zips through the menus at a speed even the most expensive displays often can't match. I mean, I can't tell you how annoying it is when a menu is unresponsive. That is not the case on the QM7K. Trust me, if you have a TV that's kind of slowing down on you right now, you're gonna really love it too. But are you gonna love the TV overall? I mean, is this something you should buy? Well, let's talk about it. The QM7K at such a great price is definitely going to be a really tempting offer in 2025. I mean, if I had $2,000 and was looking at buying a large TV, this would certainly be on my list. It brings huge improvements in almost all areas over the last generation QM7, most notably in better clarity, contrast, and viewing angles, making it a far better display overall. In fact, the QM7K is closer to last year's QM8 in many ways, which is a far more expensive TV. And I think if you were to place a 2025 QM7K side by side with a 2024 QM8, you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference. An impressive feat to be sure. I was especially impressed with the major enhancements TCL made in the contrast and viewing angles, which will make this TV far more suitable for many buyers versus last year's QM7, as those were major points of contention in 2024 for TCL's more affordable models. That said, it's not without its issues. First off, I mean, despite the improvements to viewing angles, it still remains an issue. Additionally, in dark theater rooms, this TV will likely have significant and noticeable blooming in dark scenes, making it more suitable for brighter rooms where this is probably going to be unnoticeable in most content. And finally, the latency and input lag just can't measure up to the best OLEDs, which could be an issue for some games. Ultimately, despite those issues, especially in larger sizes, I think the TCL QM7K is likely going to be one of the best TVs you can buy at its very aggressive price point, especially after sales. Considering the immense value it offers, I think buyers will be very happy with the QM7K, and it's definitely a TV I would recommend picking up on a sale in 2025. In fact, overall, despite the fact that it can't reach the heights of the best OLED displays out there, considering the value, I'm gonna give this one, honestly, I'm leaning between a 7 or an 8 out of 10, and I think I'm gonna give it a solid 8 out of 10 on the QM7K. Definitely a highly recommended TV, especially at the larger sizes. And if you're thinking of picking one up, I will have affiliate links in the description below where you might want to check because, again, it's probably going to go on sale. And when it does, oh boy, that's going to be one heck of a deal. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, RuPro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And now RuPro is offering a new detachable and upgradable pure fiber cable that sends the same 48 gigabits per second signal through its ultra thin and flexible housing, making it easier to route through walls. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out RuPro on Amazon today.